Hello, good morning, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. You are on Damn Radio. It's Monday morning. I'm coming to you live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. And feel free to phone in this morning, 573-746-8020. Should you feel the urge come upon you to chat or to discuss weird things going on the planet. There's plenty of that going on. I've had quite the weekend. So first I'm going to do a little bitching because that's what I do. It's freaking cold. What is this? Saturday it's friggin' 81. Today it's God knows what, like 12. And I don't like it. So went to bed last night. It was hot in the house. Woke up freezing. What the hell kind of nonsense is that? I don't like it, and I want change. I'm pushing for change. Make Sam's house great again. That's what we wish to do, and we wish to be one temperature all the time, not this nonsensical nonsense that we are forced to put up with. Anyway, that's my bitching for today. It's over. That is all. Maybe I'll make that for the whole week. Maybe I won't bitch again the entire week. Well, if I did that, I wouldn't be Sam. Now, would I? So I have a joke for you, speaking of that. So it's a terrible joke. I mean, it's a horrible joke, but you'll appreciate it, right? There's a guy, and he's, unfortunately due to an accident in his youth, he's got a fake eyeball. And he couldn't spend a lot of money on this eyeball. And so, unfortunately, he had to take the polished wooden version, and they had polished it up real nice. It was really pretty, and he'd have to pop it in his head, and but he didn't have the money for the very expensive eyeball. So, the glass eyeball. So he had one that was wooden, and he always was very self-conscious about it. He had a hard time, dating, couldn't find a girl. And so he's got a friend. You know how you are when you don't have a date. Your friend sets you up. With another girl. And he's like, well, I'd like to, but man, I'm really paranoid. I don't like it. I always feel uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. He said, listen, nobody's perfect. The girl that I'm setting you up with, she's got a hair lift, cleft palate, cleft lip, and she's got a hair lip. And he goes, oh, well, I don't know. He says, maybe it would be good for us to be in, be in misery with each other. Nobody's perfect. And he's going to go and he's going to take a date. And he says, well, listen, she's subconscious too. Don't say anything about it. Just go out. People are people. What difference does it make? Why are you putting such a hard time in this? This is a terrible joke, by the way. Just so you know, I'm for fair warning right here. And he says, all right, it's an old joke from Sam's, what do you call it? High school or even junior high school days is when this is an old joke. So just to preface that, used to be able to get away with stuff you can't get away with anymore. But hey, I'm a risk taker. So at any rate, they go out. He says, well, this will be great. He chooses to take her to dinner. He says, well, let's see if we can, have a nice dinner. We'll have a few drinks, we'll have dinner. It'll be great. I'm really looking forward to this. Very attractive girl. Just happened to have a hair lip. And he goes, man, I'm not a bad looking guy. I just happen to, not be able to afford the glass eye in life, So they go out to dinner. Things are going well. They're sitting there. They're getting along great. He's really liking her. He thinks she's a great girl. And he's going, man, this is fantastic. She's really a good girl. And he goes, man, is it possible? Could I have finally found a woman? And the whole time she's, thinking, oh my gosh, this guy's really great. I don't care if he's got a artificial eyeball. What do I care? And he says, you're just a great guy. And she's a great girl. And so the dinner's going well. They have a drink. They're sitting after the drink. They go to the bar in the restaurant. They sit at the restaurant bar. And they're having another drink and having a nightcap, and getting ready. The evening is coming to a close. The restaurant is getting ready to close, and he gets up his courage. It's like, man, this opportunity isn't going to come up all. He gets up his courage and he's like, man. He says to her, would you like to come over to my place? And she says, oh, would I? And he says, hair lip. Do you get it? Oh, I hope so. Anyway, it's a weak joke. But that's the joke. Sorry, that's the nature of the beast today. It's a weird day we're talking about. So what is in the news today? What do we have? We have Jewish ambulances being torched in London with video. They even provided video of all of this. This is talk about anti-Semitism, I suppose. This is nonsense. Police are treating an arson attack as an anti-Semitic hate crime. Well, that's what they do. Why am I echoing? I feel like I'm echoing in here, and I don't like it. So maybe just the volume's up a little high. Anyway, sorry you have to train along with me here at the real estate state-of-the-art studio. 4 ambulances operated by a Jewish volunteer organization in London were set on fire overnight. The incident took place in Golders Green area of the Barnet Borough at around 1:45 in the morning. CCTV footage shows at least 3 masked individuals setting fire to vehicles belonging to the local branch of Hatzalah, a network of volunteer emergency medical services that works with Jewish communities. London Fire Brigade said the multiple cylinders on the vehicles exploded, causing windows in a nearby residential building to shatter. No injuries were reported. The Metro Police said nearby homes were evacuated as a precaution and confirmed that the case was being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime. So there's also some new news on now we're going to have ICE. ICE is going to be at the airport now. Now, I guess you got to get past the ICE officials, too. I don't know. How you feel about this? Trump says he's going to deploy immigration and customs enforcement guys to be standing in for Transportation Security Administration, TSA, personnel at airports unless the Democrats in Congress unblock funding for DHS. The partial shutdown that began in February has left thousands of TSA employees without pay. Well, there's too freaking many of them anyway. That's a personal view. Probably, people don't like that. But, Jesus, they're everywhere. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting a TSA agent. It's nonsense. Resulting in there are now lengthy security lines at airports across the country. TSA and ICE are part of the DHS. However, the latter agency received $75 billion. $75 billion bucks. Let's say that again. $75 billion for immigration enforcement. Is that nuts or what? You got it from Trump's big, beautiful bill. Yeah, it was real beautiful. We've gone up $2 trillion in debt since the man took office. Anyway, that was signed into law in a post on True Social, by the way, which is also losing hundreds of millions of dollars, according to a lot of people. Saturday, the U.S. president wrote that if radical left Democrats don't immediately sign an agreement to let our country, in particular our airports, to be free and safe again, I will move our brilliant, now all ICE agents are brilliant. This is great. Our brilliant, patriotic ICE agents to the airports, where they will do security like no one has ever seen before. Everything is always like nobody's ever seen before. Well, you're going to win so much, you're going to be sick of it. This guy, no wonder he's got Hegseth running the military. That guy's a football, cheerleader, and Trump's the football quarterback. This is good stuff. The big, beautiful bill, anyway, including immediate arrest of all illegal immigrants that come into the country. Well, you don't fly in if you're coming in illegally. It's not how it works. You sneak in if you're coming in. And the people that come in and usually have a visa when they fly in. If you're coming in from a non-friendly country, you have to have a visa, or that you just get turned around, right? It's not like people are flying in and getting allowed in. Anyway, Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, who has emerged as a major supporter of the Republican Party, also weighed in, offering to pay the salaries of TSA personnel during this funding impasse. Wonder how much interest he's going to get, if any. On Sunday, NBC News, citing DHS estimates, report that more than 400 agents have quit since February 14, when the partial shutdown started. Well, that means jobs are available, so you're improving jobs, right? Well, good stuff. Anyway, I wanted to speak a tiny bit about... What do you think? Where are we going to go today? How do we speak on this topic without getting, attacked, without, causing problems? I watched a lot of news over the weekend, surprisingly. The U.S. is planning for ground forces in Iran. We got lots of people on our way over there. This is BS, friends and neighbors, according to Sammy. And, since it's my show, I can say what I like. I'm going to start with this from the beginning. Let us begin at the beginning. You do realize my last name was Trapp, and 100 years ago was Von Trapp. And as of now, Trapps are not royalty, except for, minor kings and queens who live in Chicago and chose to take the name. But here, we're just plain old ordinary Trapps. But way back when, we used to be able to sing. When you read, you begin with A, B, C, and when you sing, you begin with Do, Re, Mi. But let us begin at the beginning, which is a very fine place to start. Let's talk about one show that I saw in particular. I watched a guy, former Marine, now a political commentator, got his own podcast, and he was on a program. In fact, I think I saw him on another program after that. So I think, and he's a young man. He's seemed quite intelligent from what I saw of him, and he has a theory. And I liked his theory, and it was very well put together and very coherent. And I watch... Everybody knows I watch a lot of international politics, and I try to keep on top of that stuff. And basically, this is, according to him, and I've been wondering about this. I mean, if we're really this stupid that we're going to, go into Iran even further in Israel's, greatest wet dream, we're going to jump in there and take over Iran for Israel, we obviously haven't learned our lessons. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, figure it anywhere, Somalia, Afghanistan, 20 years, hundreds of millions, zero result. Did you know that our final forces were booted out of Iraq over the weekend, just now? And I doubt they'll be allowed back in. So now Iraq has expelled all of our military, finally, after hundreds of years. That's an exaggeration. But if I told you once, I told you 1,000 times, never to exaggerate. Let's see. Let's talk about this is not just another Middle East war. And I think this bears repeating because there's a lot of news that has been going around that's saying this really isn't just another Middle East war. This is going to be a world war. And I think that the risk of it is pretty freaking great. And it's one-upsmanship. And some people just can't handle things without one-upsmanship. And Brian Berletic, remember that name. Take a look at it if you haven't heard of it. You haven't looked at him yet. This was a pretty good talk, and I want to combine it. I mean, it dovetails somewhat with my views on the issue, but a little bit sharper. And it also I watched Sergei Lavrov, just a 20-30 minute interview that was done with him. And I want to share you a bit of a combination of all this, if I can possibly get there today. And I think I might be able to. It's a little bit long in the making, but, I think it is essential, because if you get the framing wrong at the beginning of how I'm going to give you this theory, then everything that follows it will come out crooked. That's just the way it is. And this is what's happening in most of the discussion in the world about Iran, around Israel, around the United States, especially around the Strait of Hormuz, around oil, and the broader question of where this conflict is really headed. Donald Trump changes his mind every day. 3 days ago, he was saying, we won, it's over. And then he goes back to 48-hour ultimatum. You either open the Strait of Hormuz or we're going to bomb your electrical plants. Now, this is a big mistake if he does, because there were huge bombings even in Israel, and Iran has threatened to take out desalinization plants, just like was done to them on one plant. But they only, their water supply is only 3-4%, 5% maybe taken from the seawater. The rest of the region is heavily, it needs it. Bahrain, big time. Qatar, big time. All of these Gulf states they don't have any water. They're bringing it in from huge desalinization plants. So there's these questions and the conflict and where it's going. They're not getting easy, and Trump isn't making it any better. Changes his mind every day. Today might be another day that we've won, it's over. I've declared it's over. Surrender, or we're going to bomb your plants. And so most people are being handed a simple, familiar, misleading story that is not true. Goes like this. Middle East is unstable again. Iran is involved. Israel is striking again. They're the sane people. Actually, they're the lunatics. And the U.S. may or may not get dragged in again. Oil prices are going to go up, and you have to fund it again. And this is another one of those unfortunate but somehow routine flare-ups, it's just a flare-up, right? The world just has to endure these sorts of things until the grown-ups come in to the Straits of Hormuz, bringing tons of warship, and we will calm things down and restore order. That's because we're the world's policemen. That is the typical package. Fox News, all over it. They make me sick. You watch these guys. Yeah, we're winning. No, we're not. And that's TV version. Neat little box that they want to do to you, and the box is completely wrong. You need to listen to people that have a clue, and those guys need a bigger magnifying glass because, they cannot find a clue at Fox News or anywhere else for that matter. There's been even the critical CNN. I watched something of theirs the other day and was like, geez, you're still dummies, but but they're making an effort, right? What we are looking at is not a local conflict that might have global context. We're looking at a global systems conflict that is manifesting itself through an opportunity to attack Iran, through Israel, through the growth, through energy architecture of the Middle East. That is a very different thing than a local conflict. And if you start from that proposition, suddenly a lot of what seems irrational looks very rational indeed. So we've been trained for years, for decades, to think of the Middle East as a place where things just blow up because that's what the Middle East does, right? Some tribal things, sex, some religious things, some old hatred, ancient grievances, and then the U.S. has to step in. The great powers have to figure out how to try to keep civilization from falling apart. It's a convenient theory, but it's also insulting because it erases the structure of power and how it is created. It erases logistics. It erases trade. And it erases, most importantly, energy and energy transport. It also erases the thoughts of imperial planning, finance, who benefits, and when you erase all of that, what you are left with is what we get in America, theater, and that's it. You either we hate the religious people, they're religious extremists, they're seeking the nuclear bomb. They aren't close to a nuclear bomb, by the way. They have the technology, they got the scientists, but they're not close. They are selling you a lie if you believe that stuff. That says, no, Chase, we're going to get struck by Iran. My ass, you were. You are now, but you weren't before. Did you see the video that they put out last night all over the news? Iran? That showed underground stockpiles, tons of them, with just a sample of some of their underground stockpiles of weapons that we can't reach, by the way. So one of the reasons I pay so much attention is what has been coming out of Russia, whether Lavrov, whether the talk shows here, the talk shows there, whether what I think are true geopolitical analysts and current affairs. I don't believe that they're saints over there, they know everything, or that they're neutral or incapable of their own propaganda. They have their version of it as well. But so, of course, I'm not saying that I think they're more truthful than ours. but then again, we have more to hide. Every side has a point of view. Every state has an interest. Every media system has a blind spot. But I'll tell you this much. Much of the Russian commentary is at least treating this as a strategic struggle and not some sort of morality show. Gee, we're right, and we gotta take care of the bad guys. It's always the bad guys. And that's not it. But when they talk about Iran, they don't speak as if it's just about one bad government, one nuclear file, one rash decision by a nut job, one temporary exchange of missiles. They talk about it as if this is a part of a much larger crisis involving the very structure of international law, the collapse of old restraint, and the use of energy as an instrument of pressure, which is obviously part of the deal, if not the entire deal. It's also the weakening of the old West-centered order. That's what's driving it. The stuff I've been talking about for nearly 2 years now, both in Russian and in English. It was why I was driven to go to the BRICS conference in Kazan in Russia a year and a half ago. And it's the weakening of the Western-centered order, the refusal of a lot of people to play along with business as usual, and that's a lot closer to reality than the nonsense we're getting from the usual talking heads. So think about what has already happened. So before you get into drama, right? The maps, military jargon, or even the human suffering, which is very real. Look instead at the quiet indicators, the ones that people who move real goods and insure real cargo and calculate real exposure, what they actually care about. Shipping routes shifting, insurance rates astronomical, risk models changing, ports less predictable, tanker traffic behaving totally differently. In fact, infrastructure of logistics is changing incredibly, right? Naval positions are different. Diplomatic language is getting more careful, more evasive, and in some cases even more panicked than usual. And none of that is happening because people are worried about an emotional, democracy first, and these guys are dictators. They're not worried about that crap. This is happening because the underlying system is in shock. And they're trying to figure out how we're going to absorb it. And that is the point that the average viewer misses because he is taught to think in drama rather than in structure and in infrastructure in specific and energy infrastructure. The average person says, well, there has to be, has there been a world war recently? It was almost 100 years ago, 80. But has the Strait of Hormuz been fully closed? No. Has China moved? Nope. Has Russia moved? Nope. Has America invaded? Not yet, but we're getting ready to, stupidly. Has Europe mobilized? Nope. They say they're not gonna. And because the answer to some of those questions is no, people imagine the crisis is merely hypothetical. It isn't. But that's not how the crises work. And the world is built. This is how the world is built. Highly optimized supply chains. Leveraged energy dependence, fragile, very fragile political legitimacy, financial markets, cross-border logistics precision, and, they're all inflated. And the crisis has begun before the formal catastrophe has even occurred. Who else paid more than $1.50 a gallon than what they paid 6 short weeks ago? So this is when risk is entering the bloodstream of the system through extremely high insurance rates. Now, the oil that we're buying now was supplied months ago. And why are we getting a new price on that? Because they can, and that's what they do. So this is why I keep saying this is not about who fires the next rocket or who bombs the next energy infrastructure, who bombs the next oil well. It's not about that. And or these ridiculous posts by idiots on social media. This is about what happens when the world begins to do interesting things. They doubt the reliability of one of the core energy corridors. Okay? This is a huge marketing impact or market impact. Once that doubt is in the market, the effects are going to spread far beyond the battlefield. They've already hit our gas tanks here. And even though we have U.S. economists going, we're self-sufficient, we don't need anybody's oil, then why in the hell are we paying like everybody else is? If all the oil's coming locally, it doesn't have to be shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. Why in the hell are we paying for the Strait of Hormuz? Well, it's right for people to squeeze as much money out of the system as they can. It's capitalism, folks. Hey, it's an opportunity to raise the prices. Why wouldn't you? Yeah, well, because it's cheaper here, allegedly. Makes you think, doesn't it? It's a political calculation in capitals nowhere near Tehran. It's corporate boardrooms. It's moving into military planning. It's food prices. It's fertilizer, which, by the way, is the number 2 thing going through the Straits of Hormuz. Fertilizer. And you can't get that. Everybody's talking about their household budget and how much it costs. I was telling you last week, how much extra did I pay for, by the time it was all said and done, I filled up the tank, 25 gallons, 5 times, I guess, $125, at least $150 more than what I would normally pay one way, okay, to get to Florida. That's why I think the old language is completely useless here. People go, it's a regional conflict. Well, then I want to ask, regional for who? Regional for the European economy that's incredibly vulnerable to energy shock because they've blown up Nord Stream 2 and they've gotten rid of Druzhba pipeline and they're trying to blow that up. Ukraine, that's for natural gas, and Ukraine is, at eternal war. They'll never give up on Russia, although they should. And the spring offensives are beginning even now. So let's pause and ask an obvious question. Why do so many people insist on seeing this as a local dispute when the signs of the systemic strain are visible already worldwide? Most of it is laziness, but part of it is ideology. The need to preserve the illusion that the world is still organized the way it was 20 or 30 years ago. It isn't, but they want to keep the illusion that Washington is at the center of it. Europe is a moral chorus. Yay! They're the, Pete Hegseth of Europe, with everyone else reacting only to what we do. The same old toolkits, sanctions, pressure, proxy war, selective law that only applies to others but never to us, that is going to impose world order or world colonialism. But think about the deeper answer. If people admitted to what this really is, they would also have to admit that the old system is weaker than advertised. They would have to admit that escalation now creates consequences that can't be simply fenced in. They would have to admit that controlling the narrative is not the same as controlling the outcome. And we never do that. We control the narrative. The blue dress narrative is what I call it. Because it is what it is. But by God, if I say it often enough, people will believe it. And that's a painful admission for an empire, right? For especially one that says it can do anything anywhere in the world. We're the greatest on the planet, and you never have to pay any consequences. Consequences are coming, people. One of the most revealing things that come out in recent commentary, especially out of Russia and the Russian media and the strategic talk shows, is the repeated emphasis on the fact that the world is not lining up the way it used to, not even Europe. And by the way, that's not a small observation. It's huge. In the old model, there'd be a conflict. Iraq, take an example. Then a coalition. Australia's joining in. They're going to send over 200 soldiers. England's in. They have a 77,000-man army, and they'll send 15,000 of them. Why? Because the U.S. is going, and we got to support our brothers across the sea. Series of declarations about international norms, only that apply to other people, not to us. We're the gunslingers of the world. The financial system and the media system would move in roughly the same direction, like they always do, and then pressure is brought to bear on the people that need to lose, so that the same old winners can win. Even countries that are uneasy about it would generally fall into line, at least outwardly. The model is frayed now. India isn't paying attention. They're calculating their own interests. China calculates its own interest. The Gulf states are pushing back and calculating their own interest. Turkey calculates its interest, definitely. And they're a NATO member. I wonder for how long. Even Europe, for all of its posturing, increasingly looks less like a person who's just going to fall in line, and they're acting more like a nervous, divided, energy-fragile, remember, appendage of decisions that it no longer fully controls. That definitely matters, because it means that in the moment of crisis, these crisis moments don't produce the same disciplined block behavior that they once did. They just don't. So when I say this isn't a local war, I mean not merely that it has global consequences. I mean that the very shape of the world order is now part of the conflict itself. Iran is one theater. Israel's completely another. The Gulf is a third. And by the way, Israel isn't getting anywhere near the support that they used to get, and including from me, by the way. I think Netanyahu's a bad man. That's what I think. The Gulf is another. Europe's energy vulnerability is another. Asian import dependence is another. Russia's role as an energy and strategic actor is a third, and a big one. China's patient observational position, you ought to be paying attention to, because they're watching, and trust me, they're learning. The declining credibility of old institutions is a third, and the hypocrisy around international law is front and center. Not a side note, This is the architecture right here. You can no longer claim that we even remotely follow the rules that we helped create. So this is the architecture of what's going on. And it's another point that has to be made plainly. Much of what we are witnessing right now is not confusion. It's not incompetence, at least not alone. And it isn't merely a case of leaders blundering around in the dark. Some of that, of course, is certainly true. Some of the people speaking publicly sound like they're deranged. You listen to Netanyahu, that guy's out there, okay? If you listen to our typical spokesman, you get your Lindsey Grahams. That guy's nuts, in my humble view. Morally numb, ignorant people that are out there talking about this, we got to take care of dictators around the planet. No, we don't. Let them take care of their own damn dictators. We don't have anything to do with it. If you cannot fully control the rising world, you can still try to make its critical nodes unstable. So if Israel and the U.S. can continue to paint Iran as the goon squad and that they're going to, lob a nuclear weapon, when Netanyahu finally throws out the bomb, it'll be not his fault at all. That's the way it goes. It's not his fault. He didn't do it. He was forced to, just like he's forced to invade now. He's forced to bomb the crap out of southern Lebanon now. It's nonsense, right? So if they obviously are not in control of the world anymore, and they're taking some desperate measures here right at the end of that dominance. If you can't stop your energy dependence from reconfiguring toward your greatest rivals, Russia, China, India, you can threaten the channels through which that dependence is managed, right? And suddenly, what looked like chaos in the beginning begins to resemble the method that we have used for years. No, and it's a new method. They have to do something like this. Or, you can't say that what they're doing is not logical. It's logical from the point of view of a flailing and drowning world order from 30 to 50 years ago. This doesn't mean that every actor in that field wants the same thing. Far from it. Israel has its own logic, its own obsession, and its own internal politics, its own ambitions. It wants more land. You have people down there slaughtering with abandon, and these are private citizens. They've opened it up for settlement. You know what that means? It means go in and kill people and take their land. That's what's going on right now, believe it or not. That's what's happening. Its own strategic, its own relationship to permanent war. It loves permanent war. It wants permanent war. It thinks it's the strongest. 10, 11 million people in the world. They think they're a superpower. They are, because they got nuclear weapons. And Trump has his own logic, if you can, find it. Whether it's ego, theater, domination, impulses, methodology, grievances. He's always aggrieved somehow. Those stupid people before me didn't know what the hell's going on, and I do. And he has a breathtaking indifference to long-term coherence of anything. He has fully bought into, I'm in charge, period. The American deep state, if we have to use that term, has its own continuity of purpose. And right now, it's in lockstep with Donald Trump because it's broader than any one president and far more patient than Trump's public tantrums. Europe has weakness that is masquerading as democratic principles, right? Russia has opportunity and danger all at the same time. China sees risk, exposure, and long-term advantage. The Gulf monarchies are watching their own vulnerability right now. So this isn't some choir singing from one sheet of music. It is a system under a massive amount of stress, and each actor is responding to that stress from his own position. And that is where I think the Russian commentary from Lavrov, despite its obvious bias, is pretty useful. And everybody's got their obvious biases. You have to read that in when you listen to it. That's how it works. Because it keeps dragging the discussion back toward structure, just like China, by the way, and just like India, by the way. It asks questions like, who controls the corridors? Who bears the cost? Who can wait? Who can absorb the shock? Who benefits from prolonged instability? United States, by the way. Who gains from more costly oil? Who loses from unreliable shipping? Who's trying to force whom into what hierarchy? These are adult questions, and they're the right questions. Compare that with the childish nonsense we get all over the West. Is this good for Trump? Is Netanyahu overplaying his hand? Will Iran blink? Is this escalation a symbol? This isn't analysis, it's gossip. It's theater, just like I say. So let me say something else about time because, it's also misunderstood. You hear warnings about catastrophe and assume that if catastrophe doesn't show up immediately, then the warning has to have been overblown. But, hang on. Coffee drinkers of America, unite. But strategic crises do not always announce themselves with a single clean press conference, right? They begin as a progressive corrosion, which we've been watching for a while. Confidence weakens first. Behavior changes. The contingency plan is a permanent policy. The financial distortion sets in. I mean, think about the story I just read to you. We can't come up with a budget, and the budget goes October to October. We're in freaking March, and we're talking about a government shutdown because we can't figure out how to pay Department of Homeland Services. This is BS. I mean, what kind of country do we live in? Who's the third world country? The one with, 40 trillion nearly in debt? We passed 39, I want to say. And nearly 40 trillion in debt, or somebody who doesn't have any debt at all, far less, which is Russia, by the way, and China doesn't have a lot of debt either. Nowhere close to what we have. So this contingency planning, financial distortion, alliances fraying, domestic politics are crap, and the military move that would once have been unthinkable is now thinkable because the ground has been prepared psychologically and structurally. In that sense, the crisis is not waiting for the future. It's already underway. That is why I want to, talk about something that is not just another Middle Eastern war. This is not a replay of the sectarian script of, dictators. There are dictators over there. They're all dictators. You think it's not a dictator in Qatar who's one of our greatest friends and allies? The guy's a prince. He's in charge, period. That's it. That's a monarchy. But that's okay. We're allowed to have monarchies, as long as they're friendly to us. But you can't be a monarchy or a one-rule family in Iran or anywhere else, for that matter. And what business is it of ours? Whether they act like Qatar or whether they act like, any of the other places over there. Saudi is run by a prince, okay? Emir or something like that. What do they call the guy? Future control of strategic flows in a world that no longer agrees on who is entitled to control them. The Gulf states aren't even in agreement that the U.S. can come in and run it like they want. The American troops being booted out of Iraq is a big deal, and they actually had to ask for more time to get their people out. NATO troops had to beg yesterday to get out, and they're out. And I doubt they ever get let back in. So, stop thinking about this as a box called Iran. Iran's just, a small node. It is not the story. The real story is the system, the energy routes, the financial assumptions around them, the alliances, and the fear surrounding all of it. The rebalancing that is going on. Once you start looking at it this way, it's a lot more interesting. Not who started it, not who said what on TV, not even who can score the next tactical or political point, but rather who is trying to reshape the map of dependence. And who's trying to survive the reshaping, and who's planning to inherit the order that emerges afterward. So I watched that Brian Berlitic that I was telling you about, and I found it quite interesting. Now that we've talked about this conflict, it's more systemic. The next thing we have to do is confront how it's actually being managed, or, in my view, mismanaged by the people supposedly trying to be in control of it. Because one of the most striking things you see is that a number of conflicts is that the doctrine can be summarized very simply. Escalation now will deal with the problems that it brings to us later. That's almost too crude to be real, but it's absolutely real. The one-upsmanship and the gamesmanship and the I got the bigger wiener than you here is ongoing. It is crude but true. That's all this is. You got a bunch of, the big football players in the locker and the small wimp over in Iran, and that's what we got. That's what we got. I don't believe that's reality, but that's what people think we got if you watch U.S. TV. What about the language of deterrence? Doesn't exist. Sending a message, restoring credibility, none of those things matter. But when you ask for obvious follow-up, what happens after the message has been sent? What does success actually look like? What is the structure of the peace that follows? You either get silence, total, or a slogan. We're going to take out a dictator. Well, you already did that. Now what? So you did that allegedly in Venezuela. That's not what you did. You just put in the next generation. And that's the exact same thing you did in Iran. You put in the next generation. Why won't you stop now? Maybe you have. How about Iran sends you 50? How many was it? 50 billion barrels of oil for free. We got to steal 50 billion barrels from Venezuela. Yay! It's not about narco-terrorism, not remotely. It's about something else. So this is where the analytics come into play. You don't have to accept every element of my argument, to explain the behavior of the official narrative, because when you think about it, that's where the tension exists. And it's worth laying out, something for you. One is that Israel under Netanyahu is the primary driver that has been pushing for confrontation and war with Iran for years. And Israel claims it's existential. Iran definitely sees this as existential, and they're not going to budge because of it. They're not, they think they're in a fight for their very existence. And trust me, they are. Now the U.S. is coming out saying we want to tear this up into little chunks. They'd rather have 50 different independent local monarchies than one big Iranian monarchy. That's what they're trying to do. They give a crap about dictatorship. It doesn't matter. So the alternative view, and this is where Berlitic's issue came in, is that the U.S. is not being dragged by Netanyahu, but is instead permitting Netanyahu to act on their behalf and shaping the escalation because it serves the United States' larger strategic purpose. And in that version, Israel isn't the master of ceremonies, but is an accelerant, a very willing accelerant, a forward instrument, a partner, an aggressive partner whose aggression can be folded into a broad design. If that's true, which I believe it is, the picture is changing dramatically, because now you're not dealing with a superpower being manipulated. You're dealing with a superpower that is perfectly aware of the manipulation and is proceeding anyway because it believes the long-term strategic payoff justifies immediate stability. Now, I'm not saying that everything is centrally controlled or that every actor is following a script. The world is far too complex. But there is a difference between total control and direction. I don't believe the deep state ever was totally in control. I think they all have the same goals financially and power structure. that they have always had. And this is very much like a similar situation. So there was a lady I also watched named Karine Gevorgian, and her analysis was pretty useful because it talked about a concept that's ignored in the West, the idea that escalation between major powers doesn't produce a clear winner among the powers. Instead, it creates a space for a third force. Actors who are not at the center of the conflict, but who are able to take advantage of the natural disorder that surrounds it. And that's a shift, because traditional model is binary. One side wins, the other side loses. But what she was describing is something to what we see in a number of historic situations where the direct participants exhaust themselves, weaken their own positions, disrupt their own system, and in the process create an open space for somebody else to step in. And I think that's very real possibility here. So let's ask a different question, not just who is escalating, but who benefits from the escalation continuing. And this is where it's much more complicated because the benefits aren't even evenly distributed. They're not even immediate. Some actors benefit from high energy prices today. Some benefit from a disruption to their competitors. Some benefit from the opportunities of rebuilding, and some benefit from weakening of alliances. And others are benefiting just because they're not caught in the middle of the storm. Russia. And this is why the lack of a clear end game, because we don't have one, isn't just a failure of planning. It's at least in part a reflection of the fact that for some of the key players, the process is the objective. That's America. The process is the objective. Prolonged instability, continued war, another $200 billion that the military-industrial complex gets to spread around as it sees fit. That serves as the strategic purpose itself. It reshapes economic markets. It reshapes political alignment. It creates new dependency and new security. It opens doors that might otherwise be closed. Now that is dangerous, because the assumption underlying it is that the instability can itself be contained, that it can be calibrated, that it can be increased or decreased as needed, but history isn't that kind of assumption factor, doesn't take it into place. Time and again, we've watched where actors believe they're managing escalation, and all they're doing is managing the deep state, if you want to call it that. Afghanistan for 20 years, Iraq for Jesus, we just left there. You know, the line between pressure and chaos isn't always where people think it is. And so I would watch Lavrov because, you know, the sick part is he's the only adult in the room that I'm watching. Well, it's not true, not the only, but there aren't any here. Trying to find one here is a joke. And Lavrov, you should watch his interview yesterday with a guy. Jesus, I can't remember. Pirvi Canal, the first channel one, I suppose it would be. He talks about international law, mutual restraint, negotiated boundaries are no longer the governing principle. He was blunt. He says that what we are seeing is a return to a world in which power is exercised for its own sake and no constraint. And whether you agree with his interpretation or not, you can't deny what we're watching. Targeted killings, decapitation strikes, taking out. That's illegal, by the way. Attacking people's energy infrastructure like Donald Trump is talking about, going in and bombing the hell out of all your power plants. That is a war crime, in case you were wondering. And now we're just, yeah, go get them. Bomb their nuclear plants. That's a war crime. Sanctions as a weapon, selective application of rules, that's continual. It's been that way for at least my entire lifetime, and doesn't exactly inspire confidence in stability of our old system. So when you combine these elements, the willingness to escalate without a clearly defined end game, the possibility that escalation is serving a broader strategic objective, continue the war at all costs, the emergence of third actors who benefit from this instability, and the erosion of the norms that once constrained people, you begin to see this situation is very different. It isn't just another cycle. It's a different kind of cycle. And that brings us back to the problem we were talking about. If you're escalating with no map, if you're applying pressure without a clearly articulated structure for what comes next, then you're just gambling. That's all we're doing. Not with your own position, but with the system itself. And in a world that is already more fragmented and more sensitive to disruption, it's not a small gamble. Once this prospect begins, the actors adjust. And once the markets adjust, other alliances begin to wobble. You can't just declare the experiment is over and we'll go back to what we said. And that's what we're experiencing right now. So before, we move on, look at the pattern of escalation with no clearly defined destination. We have no idea what we're doing. Donald Trump changes his mind every single day. And I wonder what today's change is going to be. So the energy system itself is the real battlefield. What have I said on this show before? Multiple times. Similar to, what was the name of the show with Kevin Costner? Build It and They Will Come, the Field of Dreams or whatever it was called. Build it. If you can control the system, you control the logistics, you control the infrastructure, then you can control the energy battlefield, right? The modern world runs on energy. Ships move, planes fly, fertilizer is produced, food is transported, industry depends on it. Your heat, Sam being cold, depends on it. Electricity depends on it. Most importantly, the entire financial and economic structure that people take for granted is built on the assumption that energy will continue to be available and flow in a predictable way. When you look at the map, not a political map, but a map of alliances and borders, energy flow we're talking about, you see the world quite a bit differently. You see pipelines, shipping lanes, choke points, Hormuz, terminals, refineries, transit corridors. You see narrow passages, Hormuz, through which enormous volumes of oil and gas must pass. We hear that name pretty often, but most people don't grasp what it represents. This isn't just another strategic location. This is one of the most critical arteries in the global energy system. A significant portion of the world's oil passes through that narrow stretch. Literally, the bottleneck through which the lifeblood of the global economy must flow. And I watched another Jeffrey Sachs analysis this weekend, too, because he cuts through the noise and reminds us that something is so obvious, but it gets ignored. You don't need a full closure of the Strait of Hormuz to create a crisis. You do not need to physically block every tanker. You do not even need a dramatic, cinematic moment where the world suddenly realizes that this is an important spot. All you need is a credible risk to that system. And we already have that. By the way, Iran says we haven't closed it. We're letting our ships through. And if your ships want to pay, they can get through too. We'll let them through. But, we're tired of being treated this way. And we control the strait. And I'm not so sure that, let's say that Karg, that island that they take it. If you think that Iran, which has bombed the crap out of several things over the last couple of days, when Donald Trump says, you open the Straits of Hormuz, and they say it's already open, and they're just open to ships paying in yuan, It's open. You want to pay in Chinese currency? Great. China's far more stable than you nut jobs in the West. If you want to pay in that currency, then we're willing to keep the strait open, and we'll accept that. Or you want to pay the piper, we'll let it go. But we're tired of being your whipping boy. And insurance is noticing. Insurance is all about it. Supply chain is done. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying this is reality. Okay. And so people don't get it. They're waiting for the next event, for Trump to go in and blow up Garg Island. That's going to help, right? That'll help. Not at all. Or if he takes it over, you know what's going to happen then? Iran's going to destroy it. No doubt. This is an existential threat for them. This is the end game. We are at the end game. And there ain't no way. Think about this like Afghanistan. Think of it like Iraq and any other of the jokes of wars we've been involved in the last 30 years in the Middle East. Number one, none of them want us there. Number two, they have no positive end game and concept of us being, they don't want us to be like we were in Europe, all of military bases, U.S. military bases all over. In a world where energy is critical, they're changing. They're changing the way they think. Qatar, a dictatorship, a monarchy, by the way, just so you know, and I'm not against it. I don't care. It's not my country. It's a beautiful country, regardless of who's running it. It's beautiful. They know they're not going to be beautiful if they don't do something about this. And they may join, they may be part of the coalition, but they don't have much to add. There's only 347,000 total there anyway. What kind of army do they have? It's not large. They're dependent upon that kind of thing. And they've been a great middleman for both sides. And for Hezbollah, for Iran, for Israel, for all of them. And what did Israel reward them with? Bomb the hell out of them, didn't say a word about it beforehand. Nonsense. So the conversation about Iran is interesting in this regard because Iran is not just another country in the Middle East. It's proximity to one of the most important energy choke points in the world. It has the capability, not necessarily permanently, but to make Hormuz unreliable no matter what. The U.S. isn't going to stop that by putting a few warships there. Okay? To introduce uncertainty, to raise the cost of using it, to force adjustments in behavior. You don't have to believe in total control to exercise influence. You only need the ability to create doubt and risk. So connect that to the broad geopolitical picture. If you're China, and you rely on imports that pass through these routes, the stability in the Gulf is not a regional concern. It's a core strategic interest. And we're watching them already sign new contracts with Russia for natural gas and for more oil. And they have the two big pipelines that come through the southeastern part of Russia. And those are pipelines. They're there. And they have a huge volume going through there. And they're connecting them through other routes as well. And China is taking more because of the instability that's going on. And China's watching quietly. If you're the United States, you might believe that you are less vulnerable, but you're still tied to this global system, even if you have all just your own, you are a net exporter, not a net importer. But even so, we're still paying. So the argument put forward by Berlitic is particularly provocative. He suggests that the goal isn't to shut down the flows, but destabilize them in a way that imposes costs on competitors, particularly China. That's what Trump is doing. He's trying to make it expensive for China. Remember what he said last week. There was conversations about, you have to go back to the petrodollar because that's not happening anymore. And we're losing our asses because of it. So he wants to force them back to the petrodollar. I heard one of the recent shows that I watched said that if Iran comes back in and agrees to do everything in dollars again with their own natural resources, then and give up on the Hormuz and whatever anything else that Israel wants and that the U.S. will force. Then we can have some sort of agreement. You must agree to this. But whether you fully accept that argument or not, it provides a lens through which certain actions make more sense than they do today. If the goal was simply to eliminate a threat, it's already gone. You killed off the top. Trump says we already won. We already killed all those guys. Then you would expect to see a strong emphasis on de-escalation, on negotiation, on a clear end state. We don't even know what the end state is. But the goal includes managed instability. If that's what we're looking for, then the pattern is quite a bit different. You see repeat pressure points. You see actions that increase risk, but they don't resolve anything. You see a willingness to operate in a gray zone, if not completely out of control. But the critical thing is this kind of strategy carries itself enormous risk. Because while you may intend to create a controlled instability, you're operating that a system that is inherently sensitive to such risk. A small disruption will have a large effect. Miscalculation is a big mistake. And once confidence is eroded, you're not going to restore it. So there was an Iranian guy named Marandi who I watched as well. He had an interview. And he reminds us that Iran is not a passive actor. It's not waiting to be pressured. It has prepared for this scenario. Thus, the weapons show of what they have, and they are not running out anytime soon. It has developed capabilities designed to operate just under this type of conflict. It has considered how to respond in ways that impose costs and, but they don't invite Netanyahu pushing a nuclear bomb just yet, because we know that's where it's come from. At least I know. You can call me wrong, you can call me a nut, but don't think so. So now that the picture is all complex and you have a system that depends on a stable energy flow and you have actors willing to introduce instability, the U.S., and you have other actors capable of responding in ways that will amplify the instability, Iran, that isn't a representation or recipe for control, it's increased volatility. So when you hear discussions about Iran, about strikes, about response, about deterrence, you need to keep thinking of something else very simple. A very fundamental question at the end. Who controls the flow of energy in a world where the flow can no longer be taken for granted? If the flow is is unstable like it is, that answer to the question is going to reshape absolutely everything else, and it'll shape economic outcomes and political stability and alliances at the end and the balance of power overall. And right now, that question isn't even being discussed. It's being contested, not through direct confrontation, but through positioning, through signaling, through, creation of more risk, mismanagement of expectations. That's why this matters. That is why it's important. Okay? And let's see. Now that we've established that this isn't a local conflict, this is a global conflict already, and that escalation is proceeding without a clearly defined destination. Nobody knows where we're going. I don't even think Trump has. He hasn't articulated it well, if he does. And the real battlefield is the energy system itself. We need to turn to a question that is in many ways even more important than anything we covered so far. And Lavrov brought it out pretty well. He's impossible to ignore. Now, Berletic, the Iranian guy, Mamdani or whatever his name was, they are talking theoretical. They are talking structural, economic, and analytical. But this guy, Lavrov, is acting as inside the state-powered systems, themselves. He's part of the issue. And when he talks, you can't ignore him. Not because he's neutral. He's not. Not because he's beyond criticism. He's not. But because he's one of few figures that speaks consistently at a state level who describes what is happening in terms that go beyond the immediate crisis. He isn't talking about good versus evil. He also isn't talking about Iran as an isolated case. He isn't talking about Israel as an isolated actor. He's talking about the breakdown of the operating system of international relations. And that's a different level of analysis than what most audiences are given. That's why I think he's a hell of a lot smarter, or at least more realistic than the rest of them. He ain't selling you some kind of a theater, some kind of a TV show, some kind of a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire program. You know, what was the one that Donald Trump had where he sells, you know, people would, let's make a deal or whatever it was he was doing, where people would sell him their ideas. He ain't doing that. Lavrov's not doing that. He's saying, watch, people, it's getting destroyed right before your eyes. And his central argument, which I've heard fairly often, or in one form or another, is the world is moving away what was once described optimistically as this rules-based order. The only people that cling to that are the people who never followed those rules in the first place. And now it's going to a system in which power is exercised more directly. We're the biggest, baddest player on the block. We're the biggest bully, and therefore we get to do what we want. More selectively and with no constraint. That's what's happening. Now the word rules-based, or the phrase rules-based order, is a bit of a marketing scam anyway, because those rules were never applied evenly. But what Lavrov is pointing to isn't just the hypocrisy of that. He's pointing to a shift in other people's behavior based on the fact that everybody says it is now just hypocrisy. A shift in even the pretense that there's some kind of a universal rule, that there's some kind of a UN charter. Nobody's paying attention to it in the West. The only people they try to apply it to is not themselves. You know, he said the universal rules pretense is less important than the assertion of force, sanctions, economic pressure, and strategic positioning. And apparently, we're all about that here now. Now Donald Trump can just say, I'm the rules-based order, period. End of sentence. Move on. I'm going to send my army, and I'm going to take care of you. Well, good luck with that theory, too, because it'll be another 20-year war. So when Lavrov talks about this, he often ties it to energy, and that is where his perspective is relevant to what I already talked about. He says that Western policy, particularly American policy, is increasingly treating energy not as a commodity, but as a control lever. Sanctions on Russian energy, pressure on European supply, interventions in countries like Venezuela and Iran, all of these, according to Lavrov, aren't separate policy decisions, but are part of a broader effort to shape who produces the energy, who consumes it, and under what conditions. When you place that argument alongside what we've already talked about, choke points, about Hormuz, about risk, about vulnerability, you begin to see that these are not competing narratives. They're just a different description of the same reality. Now, you don't have to accept Lavrov's framing to recognize that it's internally consistent. In fact, you shouldn't accept it because, you can't rely on the perspective of only one actor when coming up with a thesis, especially one so deeply involved in the conflict itself. But you should compare his statements with observable behavior. You should ask whether the actions we are seeing, targeted strikes, economic warfare, selective enforcement, shifting justification depending upon who you're talking to, whether they're part of a rules-based framework or a power-based framework. And when you do that honestly, truthfully, you can't. It's hard to argue that the old order, which is us, is functioning the way it once did, even if it never functioned perfectly to begin with. We never followed the rules-based order. But now forget about it. Nobody's paying attention because they know that the rules do not apply. China isn't responding. Russia isn't responding to the situation with a dramatic military gesture. It's responding with caution, with observation, and long-term repositioning. It understands that its own economy depends heavily on energy flow that passes through vulnerable regions. You saw, by the way, that sanctions are lifted on Iran by Trump. They're lifted. 30 days, lifted. No sanctions. He needs that oil to flow. If that doesn't tell you something extreme, you're not paying attention. And Russia, no sanctions for oil in certain areas. India can buy oil from whoever they want. And they always did anyway, but now Bessent is claiming it was his idea. I allowed them to, Donald Trump's going to allow them for 30 days to buy oil from whoever they want. Gee, thanks, Donald Trump, as if you now control India too. You don't. And they were always buying it from who they wanted. Never has there been an agreement for them to not buy oil from Russia. They talked about it. Trump said, you can't do it or we're gonna tariff you. Well, tariff away then. And then Trump changes his mind, and you don't hear about it 2-3 days later. China isn't responding to this situation with any sort of dramatic military gesture. It's watching. It's observing cautiously. Long term, it understands what's going on. India continues to purchase energy, ignores political pressure that forced alignment in earlier eras. It is balancing its relationships. It's paying in yuan a lot of times. It's paying in the ruble. Russia's accepting the rupee too, the Indian money. So, tell you what, it refuses to lock itself, India, into a position that might become disadvantageous if the system shifts. It's acting on its own behalf. The Gulf states have started doing something comparable. They have ties everywhere, multiple axes. They avoid committing fully to any one direction, even if they do give Donald Trump a $400 million airplane so he ignores them. Even Europe, despite its rhetoric, has showed signs of strain. It's caught between its alignment with the U.S. and the economic realities of dependence that have never been resolved. So what ties all of these things together and the behaviors is not coordination. There's no single meeting where all these countries sit down and agree on a plan. What ties them together is something more subtle and probably more significant. A recognition that the system itself is changing, and survival in the changing system requires flexibility, not blind alignment. Canada, you're watching them do the same thing. They started working with China. Trump is having a fit over it. You can't work with China. Well, why not? You don't want to work with us. You treat us like your lackey. We're your whipping child to the north. And Mexico's your whipping child to the south. And Cuba is going to be your 51st state. Or is it 54th? We don't know anymore. It changes by the week. Who's going to be next. So Lavrov's perspective, he isn't just describing strange Western behavior, which is constant in his review. He is describing the responses to Western behavior and saying that if the system is no longer governed by even marginally consistent rules, countries have to adapt to a reality in which power is exercised more openly, like the U.S. is displaying right now. Well, we'll come and beat you into submission. If you don't do what Israel says, we'll beat you. I'm big brother. This is what we do. And they're adapting. It doesn't mean more confrontation. It means patience. When Trump is gone, things go back to normal. Whatever normal meant. It means waiting to see how far escalation goes, how stable it remains, and more importantly, what opportunities it creates. Now, this introduces a dynamic very different from what people are used to. In the past, a major conflict produced a kind of gravitational pull. You had to pick one side or the other. Neutrality wasn't allowed, basically. Countries were drawn into one camp or the other. Pressure, current environment aside, the gravitational pull is certainly weaker. Countries are maneuvering on their own, and they have far more alternatives. They have more ways to absorb pressure without fully capitulating. And as a result, escalation isn't consolidating the system of power, it's fragmenting it further. And this fragmentation is going to have profound implication because it means the outcome of the conflict is not going to be determined just by those who are most visibly involved in it. It'll be shaped by those who are sitting on the outside. China, Russia, notably India, who are preserving their own flexibility and are able to move decisively once the direction of change becomes clearer. U.S. is wasting all kinds of money, $200 billion in a couple of weeks with more on the way. This is not cheap, and we don't have the way to keep it up. And meanwhile, cheap drones are coming all over, and we have ICBMs coming in all over the Middle East. And we can't stop them because we ran out of defensive missiles, giving them all to Ukraine for another war that we didn't need to be involved in. So I tell you what, I think we're in trouble. Not in trouble. We're America. We're going to be just fine. But we're involved in a long-term scenario. We can play attrition games too. So the important actors aren't going to be the ones making the loudest statements on TV. They're going to be the ones who say very little, but are preparing very carefully. Very carefully. And this brings us to another uncomfortable but necessary conclusion. If Lavrov is even partially correct in his assessment that the old system is collapsing, and if behavior of the other actors reflects a recognition of that breakdown itself, then we're not simply witnessing a conflict in a stable order that's always been that way. We're witnessing a conflict during a transition between two different orders. And transitions are inherently stable in the first place. There are periods in which old assumptions no longer hold, but the new structure hasn't been fully formed yet. These are periods in which miscalculation is dangerous because the rules of the game are not defined. So as we move on, the question that flows from the understanding of what we're talking about is the system is changing. If the system is changing, if the rules no longer are reliable, if energy is the central lever, which obviously it is, because every time Trump takes over a different place, it's to increase power or steal resources. And if countries are positioning themselves for what comes afterward, regardless of who wins, then who is actually going to control that system afterward becomes a very important question. And so the real question is who gets to control what comes next. So this is where discussions fall apart because they're not designed to think in those terms. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. They're focused on an event, not on a structure. They're designed to keep people engaged in the immediate drama, not the long-term result. But if you step back and look at whatever the pattern is, what you begin to see is not a conflict unfolding, but the reordering process beginning to take shape. Not fully, not complete, but visible from behavior of the actors involved. When systems are under this type of pressure, they don't just snap back to where they were before. They adjust and they reorganize and they redistribute influence and dependency in ways that often become clear only afterward. The key point is that the actors who shape the reordering aren't always the ones who dominate or win or lose in the conflict. This is the idea of the third force that Berletic touched upon and that Mamdani talked about, that we're talking about, where this is central. When major players engage in sustained confrontation, they expend all kinds of resources and disrupt the systems that they themselves depend upon. They create openings for other people, openings for others that are less directly involved, less exposed, more flexible, and far more patient. Those actors don't need to win a war. They just need to be in a position to take advantage of what the war changes. And when you apply that to the current situation, the implications are difficult to ignore. Because while the U.S. and its immediate allies are deeply engaged in managing or forcing escalation, and Iran is positioned as both a target and a responder, other actors, China, India, Russia, other regional powers who aren't committing themselves fully to one side or the other, but are preserving their ability to move in whatever direction proves most advantageous, then you'll get to see what a meaningful action really is afterward. China, in particular, stands out very much. It is heavily dependent on energy from that region, so it has a clear interest in avoiding a catastrophic disruption, but is also in a position to benefit from the very instability that is weakening the existing structure, especially if that instability creates an opportunity for investment. They have money that they're no longer investing in the United States. They have money for reconstruction, for new agreements, for expanded influence in a region previously dominated by the United States. They do not need to rush. They got the money. It does not need escalation. It can afford to wait, watch, and step in when the time is right. And that is a different kind of power than the one most people are used to thinking about. It isn't a power expressed through immediate action. They're watching us whittle away our own resources, openly discussing not having defenses to cover all of our obligations, taking people from the South China Sea and moving them into the Middle East. Think about that, friends and neighbors, and the picture that it paints for a people like China. And for Taiwan, who's scared shitless right now. Geez, something's going to happen. The U.S. ain't going to be there. We're going further and further toward mass escalation. This doesn't mean that there's any kind of predetermined outcome or that there's any guarantee about who's going to emerge as the primary beneficiary. It's too complex for that. But there are too many variables, too many potential points of failure, and too many ways which things will escalate beyond anyone's control. And so the outcome isn't going to be shaped by who fights, but by who adapts best to the changes. And that's why the control of energy routes, stability of choke points, and the ability to manage or exploit disruption are critical. Because they determine not just who suffers in the short term, but who gains in the long term. In a world where the old rules are no longer reliably enforced, they never have been, at least for the last 30, power is exercised more directly. That's fairly new. At least we claimed we weren't doing it willy-nilly before. Now we're just doing it because we're the biggest, baddest bully on the block. And where actors are increasingly operating based on their own calculation rather than a collective framework of any kind, these factors are far more important than they were before. There's a tendency in times of crisis to look for something clear, to look for a simple answer, to look for a clear line between right and wrong, between aggression and defense, between cause and effect. They're still important at a moral level, but they obscure the structural realities. That's unfortunate to say, but true. Systems do not reorganize based on morality. They reorganize based on power, resources, and the ability to shape outcome over time. That doesn't mean morality is irrelevant. It means that morality alone does not determine the structure of the system. And we've never really... morality for us is a loaded question. It's something we ignore if it is... in our best interests. We ignore non-democracy, monarchy structures if it's in our interest. But when it's not, we claim that we go to war because there's a dictator in this state. What we're watching isn't just a conflict, it's a moment of transition, and it's a big transition. Positions are going to be adopted, opportunities are going to be seized, and they may not come out as you think they're going to come out. I just want to leave you with one final thought. The question isn't who wins this week, this month, or even this year. Trump says he won already. The question is, who's building a position that will allow them to shape what comes next? Because in the end, the side that controls the condition of the future through energy, trade, relationships, and influence is the side that will define the system. And right now, the world is only focused on the conflict, and the future is being quietly reconstructed while we're not paying any attention. That's what I say. So I appreciate you listening to International Flavor today. I'm Samuel Trapp, coming to you live from the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. You can always listen to our former shows at damradio.com/podcast. You can go out to internationalflavor.com and do the same. I do another show on Fridays called civicoutlaws.com where we focus on Missouri government overreach. Hope you join me on Friday. It's going to be an interesting week. A lot going on that end. So join us in when you get an opportunity. We love to have you. I hope you have a very nice, but apparently very cold, mid-Missouri day. Bye-bye.